Cool. So, hello, you all, and welcome to another breakout session with the convention From Nothing to Anything, a celebration of deschooling and unschooling. We are joined by Ash Haywood in this particular session, focusing on unschooling and college. Yes, college. How does that all break down, and how do we even transcend or take transcripts rather and your experiences as an unschooler and make sense to go to college? Ash, I'm bringing her in and I'm just going to let her explain it because it's in my opinion difficult to even understand. So without further ado, Ash, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Cody, for the introduction. Yep, I'm Ash Haywood. A little background about me and why I'm doing this topic. When I attended college, and I had a very traditional public school education. I did for like a bit of high school, like do a arts conservatory half a day. So that was the unique part of my education, and I think probably what got me into unschooling and a little bit more self-directed learning. Environments. So in college, I attended a somewhat self-directed environment called Bennington College. And their philosophy of learning is that students develop their own learning plan, is what they call it. So there were no majors, there were no prerequisites. Instead, I asked questions and I found courses that got me to dive deeper into those questions. Bennington is one of many of these types of schools. When I particularly was applying, I was also looking at Hampshire College, which is in Massachusetts. There's also um, Goddard College and also in Vermont. So I won't go down a whole slew of schools that are in that environment, but that's what got me really excited about self-directed learning and unschooling. I worked in their admission office for 3 years, and then I went to another college that was a little bit more traditional, but was still liberal arts, women's college here in Atlanta, Georgia. And I worked there for about 3 years as well. Um, One thing that really stood out to me while doing this work is that, particularly on the reviewer side, I love holistic admission process. And I'm gonna get into some terms a little bit more, but holistic means exactly what it sounds like. The admission office looks at the full application, all the materials that they request, and we'll kind of talk about like what a typical college application might actually consist of. And holistic looks at the entire student as opposed to looking at certain metrics, right? They're not looking for, I want this GPA, like a minimum of 3.5 GPA, or, you need a minimum of 1200 SAT. There's none of that. All these factors play a role in whether you're a good fit for college. So those are the environments I came from, and that's kind of the perspective that I'm gonna speak from today.
Let's take it back. You did not come from an unschooling environment coming out of high school. That's what's so interesting to me. How
Yeah.
did you even find out that there was a thing like unschooling or self-directed learning and then choose to do so college?
That's a great question. So I mentioned my arts conservatory background, and that was the first departure I had from traditional schooling. I was a very studious student, and I was good at school. And towards the end of it, as I think most high school seniors feel like I'm over it. I'm done. I don't want to constantly be in a classroom learning things that feel unrelevant to me, irrelevant to me, I should say. And I want to dig deeper into my interest. And so I had this unique opportunity at an arts conservatory for high school where I studied music. And yes, there was definitely a curriculum, a very rigorous curriculum that we had to follow. But once you got to a certain point, you kind of just did what you wanted. And so I had endless practice time, and I was composing music, and I had time and mentorship to do what I wanted to do. And I had the resources to dig deeper. And I was like, yes, this is what I want. This is what I want for college. All of my high school teachers told me stories about, college is going to be you sitting in front of a lecture hall with 200 other people and you're going to struggle to keep up. And that sounded like a nightmare. I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. So not only was like a small college important to me, also liberal arts school, because like I said, I wanted to dig a little bit into everything. I didn't want to be just like siloed into one field or one discipline. And then like I said, discovered a school like Bennington where I didn't have to pick and choose. And I will say, this is one of the things that catches applicants up so much when they're in the process, is feeling like they have to have a major in mind or a career path in mind. And for some students, it makes a big difference, right? Like if you want to go, especially in a technical field or in a really competitive field, you want to make sure that the school that you're attending will have you well prepared for it. Especially when I talk to med school students who are interested in medical school, they ask about like our outcomes and they ask about really the process. But for a large majority of the students, not having a particular major or a particular career path, those students take advantage of the college experience the best, in my opinion, because they're wide open. And so that was kind of my experience going into Bennington. What I ended up studying, believe it or not, was archives and library science. And then I got a lot into gender studies and Africana studies. And so it was a kind of a hodgepodge, things that I was interested in, mixing it all into one.
But I think you're absolutely right. I wonder, being admissions, maybe you know this, but I wonder what are the statistics of how many students change their majors once they get into college? I was one who went from an extreme thought all my life I wanted to be an engineer, and got to college, and it was the furthest thing that I wanted to do. I started doing communications and realized I was more of a people person, and I was spending too much time doing this. But my point is, college is where you go to find that out. I mean, it's where you go to dig into, and it's really about learning yourself and learning your strengths and your weaknesses and really what you want to do. When you got to, and first of all, selecting Bennington and seeing that there were other schools that gave you that type of flexibility. Once you made that decision, it's a two-part question. First, how did you go about making that decision, meaning Bennington over other ones? And then two, once you got there, was it all you thought it was cracked up to be?
Yeah. So this gets a little bit into the application process. And, one of the things that was important to me, as a high school senior applying to schools, is that I was not going to go through all the competitive process. I did not want to go to a competitive or a school that had a competitive admission rate. I think that's another big thing about like selecting colleges. I want to go to the most prestigious one. And these there's enough stress during that transition of life. I don't think getting into a 4-year college should be part of that. And I'm someone who believes a lot into fit. So I toured all the schools that I applied to. That was a big, big component. And I definitely encourage all families to do it. You may not do it before you apply. You may get all your applications in, and typically January is like the deadline. And then after you apply, you're like, okay, here are my options. Here's where I got accepted. Tour, very important. And then I reached out to the admission counselors. Most colleges have an admission office that has counselors who, is your go-to person. We have what we call territories. And so based off of your state or based off of, your particular circumstance, like, for example, when I worked in an office, transfer students had their own counselor. And that person is like your direct person. Always talk to your admission counselor, both so that you can be informed, but also so that they can really get to know you as an applicant. I had students who were afraid that they were bothering me too much. And I tell them all the time, that's literally my job.
But that's the job.
Like, come to me for everything. I mean, I always had the answer, but, definitely go to your admission counselors. And then, so the other thing was that I was an artist. And so I wanted my application to not just be numbers and not just be, these factors that I can't really show my creativity. So I wanted our portfolio. I submitted a portfolio of my compositions. And only 3 schools actually took my portfolio. Bennington was one of them, and they actually had a student blog or a blog where they posted all the admitted students' materials, application materials, kind of like the highlights of the application materials. And they posted it there, and that meant a lot to me. And I just, when I was at that tour, I felt at home immediately. I was like, yes, this is what I envisioned it as. This is what I wanted. And so I felt very connected to the school very early on. It being small, I think, had a big factor. When I say small, we had, I think at the time I was attending, about 700 students overall, which that's like tiny for most colleges. And yeah. So I think that I just felt really understood throughout that application process, and I really got to know people.
So a
And
good tenure for the most part.
yeah, exactly. And then was it what I expected to be? Yes, it was. Um, I had an amazing college experience, and I know that is entirely subjective for everyone, but also like even at my own college, like it's certainly not a school that's meant for everyone, And I want to be clear about this too for unschoolers that like college is college regardless. It's going to be a challenge, and it's going to be rigorous. It's a transition no matter what, and so I think even people who think of these schools as like, oh, like you're just playing, you're like, or it's like it was called summer school for college quite often, or summer camp, like it was just fun, but it was rigorous, to have to like create your own quote unquote major, like
Mhm.
that takes a lot of critical thinking, a lot of deep thought, and you have to be resourceful. Um, and so I definitely grew as a learner. I grew deeper into knowing myself. That is certainly the truth. I discovered parts of my identity that I think traditional school. I was too focused on competition and traditional school. I was too focused on being like the
The in crowd.
student. Exactly. So
Mhm.
the other thing too about Bennington is that it's grade optional. Um,
Hmm.
and so students can select to, take grades, especially if they have plans for graduate school afterwards, or you can choose not to. And it's selective. Each class, you can kind of make that decision. And so I actually kind of experimented. Some classes, my first semester, I didn't take any grades. And I was like, okay, that's too weird. So I took more grades. And hello, I see some new folks joining us.
Yeah,
Hi.
so welcome, Kim and Karen. Ash is just giving um, history, how she got to uh, uh, from a traditional background going to a unschooled or self-directed college, and so she was admitted and move on. And I'm sorry, Ash, I keep using the wrong pronouns. So let me.
You're right. You're right. She here is fine.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you for
Just wanted to
asking.
make sure. We're at the point now. She's matriculated through school, and I don't want to give it away, but you graduated, and then what?
Graduated. Then I started working in admissions full time immediately after. So I worked in the college that I graduated from. I worked in their admission office for 3 years. And then I worked at another small liberal arts school for about 3 years. Which was a fantastic opportunity. I'll just say, like, because I love working with that stage of students, because it's a big decision. It's a big like transition period, and it was helpful for me to yeah, I think like reflect on my own experiences through that, and then work with students as kind of a mentor through that. And all that to say is that now I'm actually a librarian, which is what I ended up studying when I was an undergrad. I studied archival and library science, and I am in graduate school right now for library science.
Wow.
So let's take a step back to um, this is really good. The meaty part of the conversation. As an admissions officer
Mhm.
at a self-directed college, first we talked about it briefly, the admissions process into that college, and then how you dealt with other unschoolers that did come from an unschooling background or did come from a self-directed background. how that admissions process was for them getting into college.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna get a little bit specific into this school because it's unique, and the school is Bennington, by the way, for the folks who just joined. It's Bennington College, which is
Mhm.
in Vermont.
Mhm.
Um, uh, so when I applied through the Common App, and that's the go-to application for many colleges. Majority of the schools in the U.S. take the Common App, and as I mentioned to you before, Cody, in addition to filling out the Common App. And I'm just going over basics. I don't know where Kimberly and Karen, where you or your learners are at with college, but the Common App consists of some basic demographic questions, oftentimes an essay. Some schools have a supplement section, which will probably be, questions specific to that school, and then letter recommendation as well as transcript. So that's what a traditional application always looks like. For Bennington, I also, like I said, submitted a portfolio because I wanted my artistry to really show. And so for me, that was my musical compositions. I submitted recordings to them for that. And then there was also an interview that was entirely optional. But I wanted to kind of talk face to face so that they can get to know me beyond just what's on paper. Um, so Bennington, after they created this other application that I believe they called Dimensional Application. I may not have the name entirely correct. I'm forgetting it. And it was funky. It was really a portfolio that applicants can design entirely on their own. They choose what materials they want to go in there with very little parameters. There was one guiding question that was something like, what didn't exist before you created it, or something like that. A very
Mhm.
broad question. Um, and applicants had to, yeah, I saw people use plays to answer that question in their application. I saw visual art submissions for that question. I saw essays that were a little bit more traditional and kind of detailing, but it wasn't the Common App. So they really took advantage of that and submitted kind of anything. But for the unschoolers and homeschoolers who did still go through the Common App, which you absolutely can, and I saw that when I was not at Bennington, at the other school that I was at, I saw that a lot. Um, I think it's a great option, especially if you're going to a little bit more traditional of a school. And of course, if you're going to a traditional school, you probably won't have something like the dimensional application, but it's a great option for, I think applicants to really try to answer the questions, or really try to like show their writing skills, or critical thinking skills through the essay, and through some of those kind of supplement questions. And what's really important, especially for non-traditional applicants and learners, is to show community involvement. I'll tell you, letters of recommendation made a huge difference for a couple of applicants that I really remember specifically, whose material, their application was just like, I'm not sure if they're really ready for an academic setting, right? Like clearly they're really strong. We got a lot of artists, but whatever it is that may not show the academic skills, but then I get a letter of recommendation from a tutor, right? Or I get a letter of recommendation from a community member who describe how this person was able to really involve themselves in a community. That's also really important when you're especially applying for a residential college experience. So letter recommendations made a big difference. And then the transcript or portfolio, however that looks for folks. And I'm not going to talk too much about that until I understand like what background maybe y'all have with it, or maybe Cody, what you see or hear most often are concerns from families about how they put together a
Yeah,
transcript.
that's the biggest question.
Mhm.
How do you transcend your unschooling way into numbers and letters for uh, the acceptance into college. And one of the ways I already know, and you mentioned earlier too, is more and more schools are going to a holistic application process. That it's not just about academics, that it's not just about what classes you took and what grades you got. It is more so about the whole student and what they bring to the university as an individual and not necessarily academically. So in your experience as an admissions officer, and you dealt with self-directed learners or unschoolers coming from that background, how were they able to? I got a cheat sheet a little later. We can talk further about it, but how was your experience with those who came from that background?
Yeah. So I had to, in both positions actually, but particularly the last one that I was in, the more traditional school, um, there there was like requirements, like we had to see 2 years of foreign language, we had to see 4 years of English language arts, we had to see 4 years of science, 4 years of mathematics. That was really important. If you didn't have that, then I couldn't recommend you for admission. And so for the most part had applicants who, even when they were homeschooled, or I think most of them were classified as homeschooled, they would specify which like what the topics were. And for some of them I did get like narrative evaluations. And for me, that means that then it was subjective in terms of how I calculated a GPA. On my end, I had to calculate a GPA. That was important, particularly for scholarship consideration. And so it ended up being subjective. I then determined, based off of this evaluation, do I think this is A work, or do I think this is B work? And I will say, if I was being fair to the other applicants, I would not give A's for most things, because to me, that didn't feel fair to give a 4.0 GPA for someone who, compared to someone who may have gone to a more traditional and especially rigorous college prep environment. So I encourage families who are putting together a transcript to give the grade that you think that student really deserves, because it will end up coming up to the admission officer. And when I say scholarship consideration, the scholarship consideration is something that not all schools do. For both of the schools that I was in, you were automatically considered for scholarship. There was no separate application process. And so when we reviewed applications, we were both reviewing it for admission and for scholarships. And so things like that really do come down to numerical values. And so I encourage families to give, definitely a letter grade that admission offices can look at as like numbers. And this is also where the question of like standardized testing versus not standardized testing really comes into play. I encourage families who think it's beneficial. And I guess we can talk about what's beneficial. I do encourage families to take either the SAT or ACT at least once. And I do that because like I said, the numbers, it can help in the admission process. But what we've seen since the pandemic, especially, is that a lot of schools have had an influx of test optional or test blind policies. I love test optional as a college admission counselor, because once again, it allows me to be holistic in the review and really get to know applicants. So for me, when students said, I don't want to submit SAT or ACT scores, then they have two options. They can submit an evaluative interview, which would be a one-on-one conversation with me, or they would do a graded writing sample. And the graded writing sample was like a essay that they wrote for a class or as an assignment that had feedback on it, so that we could see their work in the context of their learning environment. And this was like really important to like be able to compare apples to apples in some way, or apples to oranges, right? Because for some students, I may look at a work and say, that essay is not all that great. I think their vocabulary is a little limited. I think they haven't really defended their thesis, but I see their teachers' evaluations and they're saying, no, this is strong. Your work has improved. I'm like, okay, that makes sense then. I can see then how they could then transfer over to an environment like my school, and with the right mentorship and teaching, they could improve. On the other end, I may see an essay that's incredible to my standards, and then I see the teacher's evaluations, and it says, like you need to work on X, Y, Z, and I'm like, okay, all that is helpful context. And so that's what test optional looked like at my school. I've seen that at a couple of different liberal arts schools, especially public and state schools. They struggle with test optional. Those, I mean, because it's state mandated, right? Like they are governed by their state government, and so I don't see test optional policies as much with them. And for those schools, especially, yes, standardized test scores are a necessity. And so that's why I always encourage families to at least take it once. I I always veer away. So the reason why we've also been test optional is because as a profession, mission counselors recognized a long time ago, standardized testing does not, it does not serve most non-white students, and especially students who come from low income backgrounds. What standardized testing shows is the family who has the means to invest a bunch of money into test prep. And so a lot of us are aware of that. And so I encourage families, if your student seems to really want to go to a state school, then yes, invest the money to test prep if you have it. But if there's a lot of flexibility and they're thinking of maybe some more liberal arts or arts conservatory schools, then it's not worth that investment. Yeah, it's not worth it. I just
Right.
threw a lot at you. I'm curious. Yeah,
No,
question.
that's fine. I think you've answered the questions very well. And it takes me back to two things. One, obviously, unschooled kids or self-directed learning kids in the high school era, once they've determined that college is what they want to do, then
Mhm.
obviously they do take those prep courses and start to gear their way toward what those particular colleges may be looking for in admissions, whether it's ACT, SAT, you prep for those, or specifically whatever level math you want to go into, in school.
Mhm.
So I think that's said along with dual enrollment too, as a high school
Yeah,
and community colleges that obviously a number do as an easier transition into a more traditional college,
yeah,
coming from a untraditional background, if you will. I think community college is a perfect fit to get a student more definitely used to the college environment before going to an actual traditional college. So that, and here's a shameless plug. And this is why the Genie app, something that obviously the Genius School and Karima is working on, and soon coming near to you, and that is the ability to make narratives and of your quote unquote unsubjects and make them into how they relate from everyday life into a narrative that you can give a grade to, and obviously something you just said that is beneficial to the admissions process. So, beginning of plug, end of plug.
yeah.
I wanted to make sure I got it in there though. Kim, did you have something else?
I did. I really wanted to get Ash's perspective on, I was just sharing with Karen in the other room that my 14-year-old daughter would have been completing the 8th grade if she were still in public school. And she really wants to go to high school. And so when we look at, okay, well, what is it about high school that you want? It's the experience. And paramountly is she does know she wants to go to college.
Mhm.
She wants to specifically play volleyball. She's a competitive club volleyball athlete, and she wants to play at Division I level. And she feels like having a traditional high school experience would put her in a better position to be recruited for college. I don't necessarily believe that that's the case. I don't believe it has to go that way for her. But she feels like she will be at a disadvantage because the recruiters are looking for the whole, I
Yeah.
mean, what would be your advice in regard to that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question and a great like perspective because athletics, yeah, there's just a whole nother level to athletic recruitment and particularly D1. I've worked at schools that were D3, and so certainly it is a less competitive athletic recruitment process. And the coaches always worked with the admission counselor very collaboratively to make sure the student was first academically prepared before, whether they.
Because I always felt like, I try to show her the advantage that she has of being unschooled, because she can put the extra time in the gym. She can go to the extra camps and the clinics. She can show up for practice rested and fed, where her peers are coming racing from school, getting out of school at 4:15 and having to run to the gym, and they're tired and they're hungry. And I feel like there's a possibility for her to be more competitive, but I wasn't sure about the academic part, if those recruiters are also looking for those strong academics.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll be honest, D1 is a whole other ball game that like I don't have firsthand experience in. What I will say is that especially, so when I was working with coaches on a D3 level, it was both, yes, high school athletics that were like associated with teams, but also club sports were like a big component of where we found our recruits actually. And so I don't think that like not being in a school on a school athletics team is a huge disadvantage, especially if your student is starting to reach out to recruiters, which they can like fairly early on. For the school that I worked at, literally you go to the athletics page and you like fill out a recruit form. Does she know like what school she's thinking about right now, or is college just like I want to go but not
She
sure?
has a very short list.
Okay.
And,
So our eyes are on particular places. I would encourage her to reach out to them. I think either way, she can be a strong applicant. And I don't think, like the athletics component should drive that decision of school or no school. I think there are, of course, a lot of like, social experiences that she probably would benefit from having in the school environment. And also just to clarify, are the schools that she's looking at residential? Like, does she plan on living on campus?
Yeah, yes, she wants to apply to a school in California, one in Texas and Nebraska.
Wow, all over.
Yeah.
Okay.
And she's creating that based on their teams. And I'm she's only 14. And so those team dynamics could change over the year. So I'm telling her to keep her options open. Those teams may not be her first choice for 4 years from now. But she just is afraid that she'll be at a disadvantage if she's not in some type of structured academic program. So.
Yeah. I think, I don't know exactly like what academic structure y'all do right now. Also
it's very, very loose.
It's loose.
Very
Exactly.
loose.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think especially if, athletics is kind of priority, I would lean more towards like test prep because that standardized test score will make a big difference in terms of, evaluating her application versus, traditional schoolers. I don't think it's at all impossible.
Yeah.
To be an unschooler.
I mean, who knows what the movement is surging. And I think within the next couple of years, we may be astonished at the change culturally.
Yeah. Absolutely. I would encourage the academics that could just be a little bit more and I say standardized test, I can't think of another kind of alternative to that right now. Or dual enrollment. Dual enrollment was also.
Okay, we can start taking the test. We can do online courses. Obviously, state of Georgia is very flexible with regard to that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm in Georgia too. Yeah.
Oh, good.
So yeah, I definitely encourage and not right now. I don't think like now she's young and she should enjoy doing what she's doing. Really, junior year is what we always say, what would traditionally be junior year. That is always the most important year, right? I think it's easier once you're like technically a sophomore. So what, probably 2 years from now, she's just
Yeah.
in eighth grade. To be able to transition into what we'd be looking for in junior year, but junior year grades always matter the most.
Okay.
And so I think that is really the time to like focus in, and then by that that summer is when she's hopefully starting to like actually be in communication with coaches, and scheduling athletic visits so that she can be on their campus and that get to know the teams a little bit more. Yeah, I think timeline, she's got some time. Yeah. And I'd be happy, I'm actually going to put my email in the chat,
Oh, great.
just in case, you want to talk a little bit more and we can like get more into specifics too. Yeah, happy to
Thank
offer that.
you. Thank you.
Great advice, Ash. Appreciate that. Karen, did you have any thing to add and or questions? If not, we will start to begin to wrap this. Um, if not, Karen, I want to give the floor to you. Actually, is there anything that we missed that you wanted to
I'm
make?
sorry, I was speaking, but I didn't have you off mute.
Oh,
I
okay. Go ahead. Go ahead.
apologize. No, I was just saying, no, this has been great. I mentioned in the chat that I do have two already in high school, but the unschoolers are a little bit away. But it was helpful to hear some perspectives from somebody who can talk from the other side, from the university side, on what we have to look forward to. And I'm always pro. And Kimberly will tell you in the chat, I'm like, we're not putting her in school. We can continue to do this. She can be unschooled and be successful in getting into college. So thank you for all your insight.
Yes,
Indeed.
of
So,
course.
Ash, is there anything we missed that you want to make sure you include in this talk?
I think we've covered a lot of topics. We were just trying to get at like timeline, and I think timing is best. I sometimes get unschoolers who just a little late in the process, like come November, they want to like talk about like how to be most competitive for scholarships. And November, the year that you are, technically graduating, that's too late. Like I suggest a year ahead of that, start making contact to all the schools that you are interested in applying to. And yeah, visits, tours are really, really important. A lot of schools have done virtual tours, and I encourage those too, especially if you get to talk to some current students. Those are great. But being on site, on the grounds, makes a huge difference. And so I highly, highly encourage it. And so, yeah, I would say start early. Quote unquote freshman year or ninth grade, probably a little too early, but I think anytime after that, yes, start contacting, because then you have the information and you're prepared. And schools change, like your school list changes, and that's a good thing. The other thing that I'll just highlight that I said before is go in with an open mind. Encourage your learners to go in with an open mind, particularly around like what they want to study. We were talking earlier with how some folks have a career path in mind, and so they pick a college based off that career path. That's a really challenging thing to do if you end up not wanting to do that career path.
Let me tell you.
Come your second year of college. Yeah. So, really be open-minded. I think go to a college, look at colleges that fit overall fit, right? We talk about fit and admission a lot, which is like academically, can you keep up? Do you feel comfortable with this academic pace? We talk about social fit. Will you get along with most of the student body population, knowing that like no one school is homogenous, like there's diversity everywhere, and schools have a certain culture. And so getting to know that culture and having that fit. And then the last one is financial fit, which is always the most important, because yeah, if you can't afford it, then it's not happening regardless, right? And so those three ones, when we are looking for through applications on the university side, that those are the boxes that we're trying to check off. So I encourage families to do the same.
Great, great. So much great information, Ash. We recorded this, so obviously people will have the opportunity to watch it again and get this great information that they can share with their families. Thank you so much. Haven't seen you in a while, so it's good to see you. Glad that you could join us again. This is From Nothing to Anything, a celebration of the schooling and unschooling conference, specifically unschooling and college, featuring Miss Ash Haywood. Thank you so much, Ash. I'm gonna stop recording now.
Thank you.